I'm Didi Pershouse with the Land and Leadership Initiative and author of two books, The Ecology of Care and Understanding Soil Health and Watershed Function. And we are talking today about what water's telling you about the health of your farm. So I have a question for you, which is, which of the following are you experiencing on your farm or nearby? And if you would open up the Q&A box and you could either tell me how many of these, or you could, if it's just a few of them, you could type them into the Q&A. But it would be actually quite interesting to know because very often these are all symptoms of the same thing. So even though they seem like separate problems, they're actually all about water not soaking up, not soaking in on your farm. So flooding, drought, intense heat waves, wildfire, pooling of water on the surface after rain, muddy streams and rivers after rain, algae blooms or algal blooms in ponds and lakes, alternating full or flashy streams and rivers, and then dry, low streams and rivers, rather than just a consistent flow that maybe gets slightly fuller after a rain. Your well ran dry sometime in the last few years. Natural springs that used to be there that you maybe used to go get water from with your grandparents are not there anymore. It rains nearby, but it rarely rains where you are. Or you see lots of rain clouds, but it doesn't rain. All right, so if you would put a little note in the chat, anything that would help us know how many of those you're experiencing, or if it's just a few, you could put just a few in, put the words, however you want to do that. And while you're doing that,
yeah, they're answering. Yep.
Well, great. Okay. While you're doing that, I will continue here because the big thing I want to talk about today is how many of our troubles can be helped by this weird little clumpy thing. And what we are looking at here in this photo by my colleague Phil Lee, who's at Regenerate Earth in Australia, works with our friend Walter Jena. What we're seeing here is this, what I call the soil sponge. It is the structural and functional integrity of healthy soil. And we're seeing the sand, silt, and clay particles clumped into soil aggregates and then tied together with fungal hyphae. These are mycorrhizal fungi. And also tied together with roots, healthy plant roots. So this is a close-up of healthy soil. It's a close-up of what we sometimes talk about, the chocolate cake that soil is supposed to be like. And what's important here is a few things. One is that the soil particles are all being held together by biological glues, tied together with threads, and there's this incredible amount of empty space in here. Sometimes call it sacred space, or cathedrals or temples underground, because that's where it's all happening. That is where both air and water can be held underground in ways that make the whole cycle of life work better. And all those things that we just talked about in that list, go back to the list for a sec, all of these have to do with a lack of the soil sponge. It's not the only thing that contributes to it, but it is a lot of what is going on there. So let's keep looking and see what I mean by that. So you may be familiar with this. I'm going to move my controls up and out of here. Does that look better? Okay. So I do this demonstration when I'm teaching that I came up with when I was developing curriculum around this. And our friend Peter Donovan of the Soil Carbon Coalition had once said to me, healthy soil is kind of like flour, or unhealthy soil is kind of like flour. And healthy soil is more like bread. And we often hear that healthy soil is like chocolate cake or bread. But I thought, well, what if we actually try it out with some flour and bread for the students to show this? And it became a very popular demonstration that I like to do at dinner parties. I do it with kindergartners. I've done it at the United Nations. I've done it with Wall Street bankers, and everybody gets it. Unfortunately, they don't take it to the next step, but I think you guys are the ones who are taking it to the next step. So what I do is bring out a plate of flour, get a cup and poke some holes in it to make a rain cloud. And this soil, if we think of this as soil, this is soil that does not have that aggregate structure. It doesn't have those little aggregates. It doesn't have the space underneath. It doesn't have the mycorrhizal fungi or the plant roots holding it together. So when it rains, here you go. We've got that flooding. We have erosion. We have the rivers getting muddy there around the edges. And if you were to poke under that surface, you'd see that it's dry underneath. So we also have drought happening here. If you leave this out in the sun, this upper layer is going to dry out. And then the next time it rains, it's even harder for that rain to go into the soil. So nothing's getting stored there. Lots of rain just happened. Nothing is stored. This also presents a fire risk because when the soil is dry and all the river has gone down and off to the ocean, then when vegetation, first of all, the vegetation is going to dry out a lot easier. So it's a fire risk itself, but also even with trees, leaves and limbs and things dropping, everything is not decomposing on the ground, right? So that the grasses are not decomposing, even if they've been trampled by cattle or knocked down. The trees are not decomposing once they fall to the ground or get knocked down or cut down. Brush piles aren't decomposing. So, because you don't have enough water for fungal life, for the different kind of fungi, those saprophytic fungi that decompose things. So you have a fire risk here as well. You have this flashiness of the streams because the water runs quickly through, but it's not soaking in from the sides. And let's look at what the alternative is here. So what do you need to add to flour to turn it into bread? You need to add yeast, right? So life, biology. And that's basically very similar to what happens with soil, is that when we add life, and we add life by having diverse living plants growing all the time that are feeding that life underground, and some dead and decaying plant matter, or could be coming out through manure or coming out through a cover crop, or just a healthy grassland that's got both. So when you have those circumstances for life, it builds a sponge. And when it rains on a soil sponge or on structured soil, something really different happens. The water soaks in. We can usually put about 9 times as much water here as on the flour. And it just keeps going in. The surface pores are open. They have not sealed. Even if you put this out in the sun, they wouldn't seal. If a big wind came along, it would not blow this away, whereas it would with the flour. We don't have flooding. We don't have drought. All that water is protected, being held underground. It's refilling the groundwater, the wells. And now you see what's going on. It's starting to seep out. It's starting to move underground. And so that's where, when there's enough of it, it's going to bubble back up as springs. And it's going to refill the streams and rivers and ponds and lakes from underground. So we would have a spring-fed pond, for example. It's refilling them from underground, so you don't have that flashiness of that the river only runs when it rains and then it goes dry. You have a nice consistent flow. And that is true that where you can see it in the river, but it's also true in the soil itself. Okay. So let's look at some other examples of what this is like. So this is a soil slake test that you can do. You don't need any fancy equipment, just any glass jars, like a mason jar, canning jar. You can use an onion bag or a potato bag here and take a little clump, fill it up with water, then take a little clump of soil from different parts of your farm and drop it really carefully in here so it doesn't just all break apart. And this one, if you have healthy soil, those biological slimes that were holding those little aggregates together, those are holding the soil together and they are water resistant. So water does not break this soil apart. Even if clumps fall down, the water stays clear. So that's what your streams and rivers will look like if all of the farms on either side have soil that has life in it, that can form those aggregates, that can create those biological glues that are water resistant. Why are they water resistant? If you think about almost all of the biological slimes, like egg white, or if you blow your nose in a handkerchief, it's very hard to wash if you let it dry, right? Egg on a plate, if you left it and didn't clean it off, very hard to wash. So those biological slimy things, when they dry, become very water resistant. Over here, not so much. We don't have those holding it together. The soil itself might have looked like a rock. It looked like it was holding together, but when it hits water, it comes apart. Same thing here, a different example of the same thing. But here we're seeing the infiltration, the water going into the soil, and whether it is or isn't. And we're also seeing that runoff, and we're also seeing how much the soil is breaking apart with the water. So over here, we have a circumstance where no water is soaking in. If you flip this pan over, the soil is dry underneath. It's got a shower head up above. It has rain a few inches on here. So a few inches of soil, a few inches of rain, nothing soaked in. It all ran off and you lost a lot of soil. The average corn harvest, for every bushel of corn, you lose a bushel of soil. For every bushel of soybeans, you lose a bushel and a half of soil. That is not sustainable. Over here, as you go over to the left, you see more and more water is soaking in and less is running off. And now over here, it's clean and clear and nothing has run off. So there's your spring water, there's your drinking water. It's also been remineralized by going through that big carbon filter of the soil sponge. Now, what's interesting here, what we learn in ag school is that it's the ratio of sand, silt, and clay that determines how well water infiltrates or is held in the soil. So sand, and that's true, that sandy soil will infiltrate faster, but hold on to it, not hold on to it so well. And clay soils, it'll infiltrate slowly, but it'll stay moist for longer. So that is true, but these 5 samples are all the same soil type. They all have the same ratio of sand, silt, and clay, and yet they're acting really differently with the same amount of water, same amount of rain or irrigation that's been put on them. So what's different here is that more and more of the soil health principles are being used as you go to the left. So we're getting rid of tillage, we're doing more diversity, we're leaving more litter on the surface, letting go of fertilizers and pesticides, and integrating animals more into the system as we go to the left. Another close-up picture here, I think it's about magnified by about 100 of the soil sponge. You can see the glues, you can see these threads of the fungal hyphae. Kind of amazing how much structural integrity there is and how much functional integrity that provides. These are actually, I used to think these were water droplets, and so did the rest of us. But it turns out these are actually the fruiting bodies, basically the mushrooms of the mycorrhizal fungi. The mycorrhizal fungi are the ones that actually grow right into plant root and then go out into the soil and seek out nutrients for the plants and bring them back in exchange for the liquid sugars that the plant is making. So actually we might, how are we doing with time, Lynette?
We're doing good. Yep. You
Okay.
still have at least, yeah, probably five or 10 minutes. Yeah, before we go to questions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's go through this. This is kind of a lot of words here, but I do think it's helpful to understand all the different influences on why a landscape might or might not hold water. Because the soil sponge or soil structure, which is here number 4, is a really important one, but there are other things that influence that. So one we talked about is texture, the texture of soil. So the size of the mineral particles and the ratio of those sizes. So do you have a sandy loam or clay loam, etc.? The depth to bedrock or ledge or big rocks. If you've got a very, very huge rocks underneath, no matter how much of a sponge you have on top, that water can't really go anywhere. Um, the organic matter content. People often confuse these two. And I'm about to tomorrow give the keynote at a composting conference. And I'm going to talk a lot about the difference between these two. Because people say, oh, for every X% of organic matter, your soil will hold this many more gallons of water. And that's true, but that's different than the sponge. The sponge magnifies that hugely. So organic matter is like dried grasses and leaves and compost, etc. It's things that used to be alive and that are now, usually we think of organic matter primarily as the part that is decomposing or decomposed, though technically it also includes the life in the soil. So if you think about taking a bucket full of dried leaves and you weigh them, and then you soak them in water overnight and weigh them again after you've drained them off, you would see that the leaves will hold a lot of water. And that's because those cells in the dried leaves used to have water in them. And once they're dry, if you re-wet them, they will soak up water into their cells. So that is true also in soils, that the dried old plants that are underground will soak water back into them. But remember that picture of the space between the aggregates? That's number 4. And so organic matter helps to build the soil structure or the sponge, but you can have a lot of other space for holding water by having those huge huge numbers of micropores and macropores underground. And then there are the tunnels and burrows and cracks that animals make, or that sometimes happens when you have a muddy soil that has cracked. And that's really helpful. We think, oh, we don't want any moles or gophers or whatever. But if you get, how a sponge is very dry. If you have a kitchen sponge, it's very dry, and you try to wet it, it takes a long time to wet. So those tunnels and burrows are really helpful for wetting the sponge after a long dry season. So don't get rid of all of those little critters. They're doing some good, and they're also depositing manure below the surface very effectively. The openness of the pores on the surface, even if you have a lot of space underneath or a lot of organic matter underneath, if you get surface sealing or compaction on the surface, you are going to have a hard time soaking up water. The plants and trees actually take up water, particularly trees will take up the water when it falls and then release it during dry season. So having extra trees on the land or maintaining a forest on a portion of your land is really helpful for keeping water in the landscape. The slope or the terrain or the topography, obviously, if you live in a valley with big mountains on either side, that will influence how much water is coming to you. If you're on a hillside, a steep hillside, there just isn't as much time for the water to soak in before it runs off. The speed of evaporation obviously influences how much water stays on your land. So having shade from cover crops, from trees, etc., will both break the wind, which is a very high, creates a lot of evaporation, but it'll also keep the temperature down. And then obviously how much rain has fallen will influence that as well. All right, I'm going to just jump through here. We can go back to those during the questions if needed. but I want to talk just briefly about the temperature. So having a soil sponge actually creates an insulating layer there in the soil that regulates the temperature. And the best way to grow the soil sponge is to have diverse plants growing. The plants feed the workforce that makes the sponge. And when plants are growing, all the time that plants are photosynthesizing, they are also transpiring water, or basically sweating. So that water is changing from liquid into a gas. And to do that, it takes heat out of the air. It actually removes heat from the air and puts it into that reaction. So there's one study that showed that the air above a green transpiring landscape is on average 9.5 degrees cooler than bare soil and 21.5 degrees cooler than pavement. And then look at this study from England, that if you look at these places that have a lot of vegetation, the average cooling effect compared to paved city streets, that this is the air, not the surface. Botanical gardens, where they often keep the soil moist, or wetlands or rain gardens, or green walls in London have water at the root zone. So between 7 and 9 degrees cooler. Just having trees in a neighborhood can reduce the heat by 7 degrees almost. But in order for plants to transpire, they need water at their root zone. So how on a farm do you keep water at the root zone? Is you need to grow the soil sponge. That you can dig a pond, you can put in swales, you can do all of those things, and that will help to slow down the water and capture water. But you really need the soil itself to be structured in order to capture water on a landscape scale. And I think I might end here for now before we go to the questions, that there are two legs of climate change, two different ways of thinking, not two different ways of thinking, but two different aspects of climate change. The one we always hear about is the greenhouse effect. And that's basically like the lid on the pot. It is the molecules in the air that are keeping the heat in our atmosphere and not letting it escape back out to space. So the sun shines during the day, the surface heats up, and then that heat radiates back up and warms us. And we actually need that in order to survive on the planet. We would freeze without it. But that's basically like the lid. That's what's keeping the extra heat in. But there's a whole other aspect of the temperature of our planet, and that is the flame, right? So how hot does the surface get? How much has the land surface temperature changed? So we can, if we're having too much heat, we can take the lid off by reducing greenhouse gases. And we've been trying to do that for decades and decades and decades. And it's really hard to know whether you've done your part, because you'll never feel it locally. It's a global issue, right? But this part, we can also reduce the flame. And that you can do right on your farm. You will know if you're having that effect, because you will see those temperature drops compared to other places, just like those last couple of slides we looked at. And that is something that every single one of us can do. Even if we live in an apartment building and put plants on the balcony, it will reduce the temperature of the amount of sunlight that is being absorbed and that gets radiated back. So we can turn down the temperature through vegetation, through additional plants. So we can do that with letting the crops. Let's see if we got this slide here. No, oh, okay, I have a slide about this, but I don't think it's in here. We'll just go through a few of them. So simply having cover crops, having taller, more diverse leaf shapes of plants on your farm, having trees integrated into the farm. All of those are, if we go back up to look at the street trees, right? The street trees themselves reduce the temperature on average 7 degrees. And look at, this is the range. The range, it might be 21 degrees cooler in a neighborhood with trees. That's a big difference, because what are we up to now in terms of the amount of average temperature that we're experiencing with global warming. The global warming is simply a set of individual temperatures in individual neighborhoods and towns that are averaged out. So we're worrying about 2 degrees, 3 degrees, 4 degrees, but all of these can offset that locally. So you can create beautiful green oases for yourself and your neighbors and your animals. Okay, I'm going to stop there and see what people are thinking.
Yep. We've got a question from David. He says, what about capillary action? We have a clay loam soil, which can wick up moisture 15 feet. And when we think we should have low yield due to lack of rain, we can be surprised.
Yep. So capillary actions should probably be on that slide there. You're right. And that is part of why the soil type does matter, right? And salinity is in there, and salinity can influence the capillary action too. And so that might mean you have some water available when you didn't think you did, but it also really, really makes it clear why you need to have that plant litter on the surface. And the folks in India that we've been working with in a very hot, dry part of India and southern India are using a tremendous amounts of plant litter and having really great effect there, because it actually provides food for the decomposers that are part of the builders of the sponge, but it also really prevents evaporation in places that have uncertain water events. And feel free to put more in the Q&A if that didn't answer.
Yeah. And what about salinity? How does that affect this capillary action?
Well, so when you've had irrigation over a long period of time, and the salts tend to come to the surface. And as you all know, like if you leave a dish of salt out after your picnic, it's going to get wet, right? Or you leave the salt shaker out in the summer on a humid day. So the salt draws water to it. And so as the salt moves up in the soil profile, it's going to bring more water to the surface where it can evaporate more quickly. And salinity is a tricky one I'm not your why-to person. I'm not your how-to person, but everybody else here is your why-to people. You guys get each other. And I know Ecdysis is working on building a community where you can mentor each other, which is awesome.
Yeah. Go ahead and put your questions in the Q&A if you have something that you're curious about or you want to talk about. Yeah. I noticed that a lot of people talked about drought. It seemed like as one of those
Oh yeah,
things,
I was curious
right?
what
Yeah.
people found.
Almost everybody included drought, it seemed like, yeah, in their number of things that they're seeing, and intense heat waves, yeah, things like that.
Yeah. So along those lines, maybe I will talk for a moment about how, sorry, I'm just looking at slides here for one sec to see if there's anything else that was related to that, but let me get back to you. Let's talk a little bit about the concept of the biotic pump, because that's a really, really interesting thing that people are just starting to talk about more. And it's kind of the larger corollary to the soil sponge. So we were just talking about how air temperature can really change when water evaporates from plants, or it transpires from plants, or evaporates from the surface, but plants have way more surface than just the soil surface. So that when water turns from a liquid into a gas, it expands. So the gas is bigger than the same amount of water as the liquid. And as it goes up into the air, if you have a very diverse landscape, the plants themselves make little particles, and some of it is pollen, but some of it is like the volatile organic compounds that the plants create, and microbes that live, like bacteria that live in the leaves of plants and then go up with the transpiration and up into the air. So the sky has this whole other ecosystem in it. You could say the sky has a microbiome. And water will stick to those little particles in the air and those little living things in the air, and it will recondense. So it will go from being a gas, a water vapor, and become little droplets suspended. And so that's when we sometimes in the morning, the sun comes up and you see a mist rising up over the fields. I don't know I think there's a little mist in my hair. My screen saving shot is Lynette's cows and sheep.
Yeah,
And I
exactly.
love being on the farm and watching that mist rising up in the morning. And so when you see the water in the air, then it's not gas anymore. Now it's liquid water, suspended little droplets in the air. And then that mist will go away because the water evaporates again and turns into water vapor. And then if you're lucky, it'll turn into clouds. So each time that it becomes visible again, that volume of water that was taking up all that space in the air condenses. And if that keeps happening, now you're creating a suction in the air around you. And the way a continent is supposed to work is that happens on the shoreline and then inland and then inland, and that vacuum keeps moving across and it pulls the evaporated water from the oceans across the continent, or it pulls in the rain clouds that are where your neighbors are. That's why I asked that question. Are your neighbors getting rain and you're not? So, but in order for that to happen, you have to have the biological activity in the air. You have to have diverse plants and trees and forests and grasslands, etc., down below to provide the condensation nuclei for the water to condense onto and create that vacuum. So that's called the biotic pump. And that's one of the reasons why we are having so much drought, and also why we get so many big storms on the coasts, because the water is all coming off of the oceans, because oceans always have water, right? And they have actually a lot of life in them that helps to create clouds also. But then it bumps into the cities on the coasts, and they are like a big high pressure system that's pushing that moisture away. And so it all balls up and creates these huge storms in certain places, but it can't move inland. And the same thing can happen in a place like Kansas. If you have dry, burned fields and not enough biological activity and not enough diversity, then the water will evaporate, but it's just water vapor hanging in the air, and it's in its most expanded state. So it can't suck. It doesn't create that vacuum. It can't recondense and pull the moisture in. Pretty cool, huh?
Very cool. Yeah, that is cool. Yeah. And that also would explain the intense heat waves too, right? Because it's not
Absolutely.
allowing it to cool. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And what about the pooling and the muddy streams?
What about the what?
The pooling, when the water just pools on the ground
Oh,
and
when it pools. Yeah.
yeah, and then
So
just
when the
runs
water
off.
pools
It
on the
doesn't
ground,
stay.
right, right. So if the water pools on the ground, or if it's, runoff is the same thing as pooling on the ground. It's just when you have a slope. That means it's not infiltrating. It's not soaking in. So you have some sort of compaction, or you have this soil sealing. So the pores on the surface aren't open. You don't have that sponge underground. And even if the soil is kind of it's not necessarily compacted into a block, but we saw with the flower that even if it's kind of free moving, it can still function as if it's compacted if it doesn't have the biology to create those pores. So that's when you get pooling and puddling on the surface. And that's also when you get the runoff. So what do you need to do? Plants all the time, living root in the ground all the time. Diversity. Diversity is the biggest improvement you can make in the biology that is going to build that sponge for you. You don't need to do the work. You let the plants and the microbes and the fungi do the work. Reducing or eliminating tillage as much as possible, because that breaks it up. It's like putting that bread in a blender.
And that's kind of what
Reducing and
we see.
eliminating.
Yeah, that's kind of what we see
Yeah.
sometimes when we're doing the water infiltration test. Is that,
Yes.
it's one of those things, right? They're like, but I don't understand, how come the infiltration rate was so slow, and
Yep.
a lot of times we have to talk about, well, what kind of tillage was done, in your field or in your garden area, if you're mixed veg or something like that. And it's interesting that you wouldn't think, right, that just that little bit of tillage, even if it's just broad fork, on your seed beds that you're preparing. But then when we come to try to do that water infiltration test, it's just like the flower. It doesn't want
Yep.
it, it just pools on top and it doesn't let it go down. And that doesn't make sense, right? You're like, that can't be right. I stirred up the soil, right? There should be
Right.
those porous spaces, for that
Yep.
water to go down, but it
Yep.
it doesn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
And is it
Absolutely.
that life, right? It is it those soil aggregates, right, that create that space. And so
Yeah.
when we do the tillage or just even the broad forking, sometimes that will create that environment where that water won't go down. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's been really questioning.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's one of the questions that I get quite a bit, after we get the reports back. Which, by the way, the reports are coming. If you haven't, yeah, for the 2025 season, yeah, they'll be here out in the end of March. So, yeah.
Great.
And how about
Let's also
algae
do.
blooms? What if they're seeing algae
Oh,
bloom?
algae blooms. Well, algae blooms is kind of a twofold thing. The direct thing is that there's too much nitrogen or phosphorus going into the water, and that feeds, just like it feeds the plants, it feeds the water, the algae that's in the water. And sometimes it's okay algae, and sometimes it's very toxic. Like if your dog drinks out of it, they will die or need a serious expensive vet visit.
Yeah.
Um, uh, but why is that water reaching the pond or the lake from the surface? So if the water goes down first, and if you don't have tile drains,
Yeah.
which is another issue, uh, if the water goes down and is held in the soil, any of those fertilizers or manure, et cetera, or whatever's been spread is going to get integrated into the soil. It's still not, the artificial ones are still not great for the system. They will actually make it harder for the soil sponge to form. But manure, et cetera, is going to be able to go in. You're going to have dung beetles. You're going to have pores on the surface, et cetera. So it's not going to reach the ponds and the lakes in the same way. In Vermont and in some other places where we have very hilly, we have frozen fields, and there it's a little harder to deal with. So then you really just need to think about how much am I putting on the surface, and if it's more than would happen from nature, if you have all your cows in the barn getting milked, and then there's a whole bunch of manure that's taken out and turned into this or that, and then all spread at the same time, and then you have rain on top of snow, or rain, or rain on top of a frozen field. That's a problem. So that's a vote for having animals that are more integrated into the landscape. And I understand, since I live in dairy country, that
Yeah.
that it can take some creativity to get that right.
Yeah. Yeah.
But adding it's sort of adding a problem when you add conventional fertilizer to that.
Mhm. Yeah. And David responded again. He was the one that talked about the capillary action. He said,
Yeah.
you are correct. We see increased salinity in those years. Driving those salts back down is not easy. I am still looking for effective ways to do this on a grain farm. Perennials and
Mm,
ruminants are the answer where that works with economics. Zero till is a foundation but needs plants from snow to snow through diversity and cover crops is easy to say, but harder to implement, especially in the northern Great Plains with a short season
yeah.
and limited rainfall. I have a research program I call Delayed Germination Seed Tech, where we coat the seeds and seed it with our spring cash crop, and it germinates at syncytials of the cash crop. The cash crop.
So both both Lynette's other project, Fuller Field School, and my Land and Leadership Initiative have some wonderful videos of Colin Seiss.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that in general, the Australians are the place you want to look to for dealing with salinity. However, they don't deal with snow. So it is a tricky thing. But Colin Seiss, Seis, maybe Lynette can share where one would find those recordings,
Yeah.
and I can share as well. Uh, might take a minute,
Yeah.
but he did a webinar for me where there were a lot of US growers asking him practical advice. I can't remember how directly we talked about salinity there, but I would say in general, look to folks in Australia for that, because they have such a huge salinity issue there, and there are some really, really amazing forward-thinking regenerative growers and grazers there. So it sounds like you are on the right track, though, in terms of that you're experimenting and figuring out what's needed, and tricky issue. But also good to know that, just pouring on the irrigation is not what we want to keep doing. So
Yeah. And I wonder about crops like barley, changing maybe the rotation and including barley, whether that would affect,
yeah. And the reason I brought up Colin Seiss is that he is combining grain growing with grazing. And so you get the benefits of both there. And also he also is raising wild native grass seed. And so getting lots and lots lots of income streams off of one system.
Yeah, including merino wool, right, from sheep, because he runs a large flock of sheep also, which he uses,
And breeding
right?
Kelpie and breeding Kelpie sheepdog. Yeah.
Yep, and breeding the dogs too. Yep, he's got a number of income streams. Yeah, but working with a more of a perennial system, but also,
Yeah.
was able to, the cash crop. And the cash crop, I always love
He
his
calls it
story.
pasture cropping.
Yeah, and I always
Pasture
love his
cropping is
story
what it's
because
called.
the reason that he grows the pasture crop, right, he grows the oats is so that he can feed the sheep in the winter, or in their winter, right, when the forage isn't quite so good. And he often says, sometimes I have to feed it and sometimes I don't. And either way,
Yeah.
he's got the resources to be able to take care of his sheep or to sell it at the end of the season, if he doesn't need it. So yeah. Definitely is an
Let's
interesting.
see. I'm not sure. Is there a way for me to put a link in somewhere?
I haven't figured that out yet, but what I can do is I always send out an email at the end, and so yeah, I can have you just provide that to me, and I'll send him an email after we're done.
Okay.
Robert
Okay.
Jones says our
Here,
aquifer has been
I'm gonna
dropping.
put it. I'm gonna put the link in for David. That's
Okay,
a start, and then I'll send
yeah,
it to you. There we go. Okay.
and then here's
Oh,
a
actually, maybe others can see that too. So
yeah.
go
And
ahead.
Robert is from Colorado and he grows potatoes and specialty grains and cover crops. Our aquifer has been dropping and the water quality has gotten worse. This might be causing more algae in our irrigation ponds. What do you think?
That is the quality of the water that's coming from the aquifer.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, certainly one thing that we know is, that as as aquifers, and I want to, a lot of people use the term aquifer and groundwater interchangeably, and the aquifer is really what's like down below the rocks. It's kind of your savings account of water, right? And the groundwater is more like your checking account of water that should get refilled with rain, right? Aquifer is not necessarily getting refilled with rain unless you have really open channels in the rocks. And so as the aquifer drops, you're going to end up with a lot more minerals and, in the water, because it's getting more and more concentrated. And sometimes that can be things like uranium and weird things, so, which is happening under Kansas, I understand.
Yep.
That, the levels of certain toxins in the water are going up. So yes, like I imagine that could definitely be contributing to the algae blooms. I don't know that specifically if the aquifers dropping is creating more nitrogen and phosphorus specifically, but it could be. But also, as I said, like tile drainage can be a big contributor to that. And as well as the lack of the sponge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he said they tested and they did find uranium in the water. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so scary.
Mm-hmm.
Really scary.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so all the more reason, when and I might be able to quickly pull up a few slides from the project in India, that as the sponge develops, you just need way less irrigation. I mean, that bread, like we saw, holds like 9 times as much water. Or if your infiltration rate changes from, I've seen on organic farms, I've seen, where I was testing infiltration, and I put the ring in and sit there for half an hour and wait for that inch of water to go down, and nothing would happen. So, well, it's about time to pick up my son from school, so I'll go pick him up and we'll come back. Bring him back. We check the ring, it's still sitting there, and then we
Yeah.
and take him to his, baseball game and come back.
Yeah.
Still sitting there, go watch the baseball game, come
Mhm.
back, and it's maybe halfway gone after 4 or 5 hours.
Yeah.
So if your infiltration is anything like more than 20 minutes and your land has any bit of a slope, you're not getting that water. It really needs to be, like, I shouldn't say a number, but 4 minutes or 40 seconds or 4 seconds.
Yeah.
We want numbers more like that. And, think about, if you're just, and you don't need to use the ring. You can take a jug of water and pour it on the ground, and does it run off, or does it sit there, or does it soak in? So you can do a quickie just by looking at pouring water on the ground.
And talk a little bit about, the types of soils and things like that. When it comes to water infiltration, right? What is it that makes it go really fast? Like we talked about sandy soil and we talked about clay soil.
Yeah, so a very sandy soil, like if you're at the beach and you spill a drink, it's going to go in really quickly, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you have wet clay, and you pour water on it, it's not going to go in. But the amazing thing is, when you have diverse plants growing over time and you don't till, et cetera, you use the soil health principles, a sandy soil will actually start having more and more structure and organic matter, et cetera, in there. And it's going to start holding more of the water at the plant root zone. Mm-hmm. So you won't lose as much water, and it won't evaporate as quickly. Mm-hmm. And that clay soil is going to have more and more and more of those spaces in there. And if you have a clay soil with good aggregation, it's a beautiful thing, because you have all of the nutrient availability that clays provide. And you also can infiltrate water, and it will hold on to it for a long time. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. And the thing with very silty soils is that there's where you need to be really careful, because those silt particles are the ones that will float up when they get wet and move sideways. And then when the water goes away, they plug those surface pores. And then you get with that sort of slime on the surface that turns
Yeah.
into just a slick surface when it dries and it won't go in.
Yeah. Sometimes we'll
But
see when we're sampling, right? We'll see some algae, some type of green algae that's growing
yeah,
on top of the soil. Um,
yeah,
and a lot of times it would
yeah,
be in orchards and things like that, and something that's been irrigated usually. Yeah.
yeah. And so that is a sign that the water's sitting on the surface,
Mm.
and that there also is not a lot of diversity in terms of not just the plants, but the biology in the soil, so that it's creating the conditions where nothing's eating that,
Hmm.
if a
Yeah.
little algae forms here and there, and you have lots and lots of life in the soil, someone's going to go, "Ooh, algae, my favorite," go get it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
nothing should be like sort of like, you know, uh, growing in excess, right? Just like if you have a bazillion mice on the farm and no owls, then you're going to see a lot of signs of mice. But if you have a diverse ecosystem of animals on the farm, you see a mouse every now and then, you see an owl, you see this, you see a fox, you see that. So
Yeah.
similar to what you see on the surface of the soils.
Hmm.
I was going to share, let's see, a couple, or if there's questions, go ahead and
Yep.
ask. I don't know
I'll let you know when I get them. Yep.
okay. Let's see.
Mm. Oh, I like what Robert had to say. He said, I liked the idea of the biological pump illustration. It explains how Roundup can be detected in rainwater.
Yeah, yeah. And the there's a lot of different words for it, but usually the word we most use is the biotic
Mm.
pump. I'm not sure why the phrase was
Biotic.
coined by two scientists in Russia, only one of whom is still alive, and her name is Anastasia
Hmm.
Makarieva, and she's become a real advocate of both forest conservation but also soil health, so
Hmm.
regenerative ag.
Yeah, I
Very
think
fun to listen
when
to.
I always think about that too, that biotic pump, I always think about the bacteria. It's one of those things, it's
Mm-hmm.
that smell that we smell, right, when it's going to rain, and
Mm,
how that bacteria is affected by, yeah, using some of these chemicals. And
mm-hmm,
does that affect
mm-hmm.
our rainfall? It's one of those questions I always wonder, how does that, especially with, Roundup being an antibiotic, and how does that affect
Right, it's a
when,
broad spectrum antibiotic.
yeah, and
Yeah,
so how does
yeah,
that affect when that bacteria in that biotic pump, and is that part of that effect on our rainfall too? I mean, just one more little thing. So,
yes. So part of what you're describing is that there are bacteria that live in the stomata of plant leaves that go up with the transpiration stream. So
mhm,
when the plants are photosynthesizing and growing and they're sweating out that water and it's evaporating into the air, those bacteria ride upward with that.
mm,
And they are one of the only things that can condense enough water droplets to make something heavy enough to fall back down as rain.
mm,
So you can get cloud formation from the volatile organic compounds, which are like the smells of flowers and pine trees and
mm,
grass, etc. And you can get it from pollen, and you can get clouds, sort of hazy clouds, to form around smog and car exhaust and things like that. But it's the bacteria that will actually create the snowflake or the raindrop that's heavy enough to fall, because it takes something like 1 million of those little cloud droplets to come together to form a raindrop. So it's going to just share. This is a free download. If you go on landandleadership.org and type or look at the top under Learn, and it says Soil Health Manual, it'll take you to a Google form. And if you just fill that out as soon as you filled out the last question and hit submit, the link to this PDF, it's like a 120-page PDF. It is aligned with next generation science standards for middle and high school, and also with the FFS standards, and I'm confusing FFA and FFS. I used to work for FFS, the Farmer Fields, but the Future Farmers of America, the agriculture standards in terms of high school. But it's also used lots and lots and lots by adults all around the world. It's being used in 100 countries, and it includes that bread and flour thing. It includes you can see some of the stuff on the surface, that rainfall simulator, a bunch of different exercises. And this is how I shifted actually from my work as a holistic healthcare provider to working with soil and water. This is a road near my house. I think Lynette has gone for a walk with me
I've
there.
been on that one, yeah.
And we've had some pretty intense flooding in Vermont. And I like to just show this. That is the same road after a flood. And what's really interesting, this became this most amazing soil pit I've ever had. I spent a lot of time down there looking at the soil depth and the beautiful, the soils here under the forest and the ferns was beautiful soils. Everything that washed away was simply the road, right? Which tells you something right there.
Yep, it does.
But that was part of what got me really interested, was these various floods we had, where we had multiple incidences like this. And this is millions of dollars and a year of not being able to walk down to our swimming holes on this road, et cetera, to repair this, and over and over and over again, right? So so then I met up with Peter Donovan as I started researching this, and he and I traveled together in this bus that's now at Lynette's farm, doing soil sampling. And I started writing up curriculum related to that. And I shifted from being an acupuncturist who was working with holistic bodies, body care, to I used to tell my patients, don't worry, I'm still sticking long, sharp objects into living systems, just on a larger scale.
But in soils.
And my clinic, where I am talking to you from right now, changed from treating patients to like kind of a soil lab for a few years while I was learning all of this. And this is what I'm doing here, is doing bulk density. And this is something that you can do yourself. That here's a friend of ours doing this at a farm. And the instructions for this are in that manual. And basically density is like how compact is the soil, how much airspace is there in a given set of soil. So you make cut off a little piece of tailpipe or something like that into a known unit size. So it's going to be the same one you use all the time. You can do it with a soup can if you need to. And then you collect a soil sample, not scooping it in, but actually kind of like banging it into the ground under the surface until it's full. And then you dry it like I was doing there, and then weigh it. And over time, if your soil is becoming more fluffy, it will become less dense. So it will weigh, a can of your soil will weigh less, as long as you actually extract it you don't press it down, like you would do with brown sugar. You extract it in a whole shape, right?
And that's one of the tests. And that's one of the tests we do. Yep.
I bet you. Yeah. So you'll see that bulk density is one of the things. Water infiltration testing, where you put this is now a larger ring into the ground and pour water into it, and then time it and see how long it takes to go down. And this is at a school near me and a school in Chicago where we were developing that and finding ways to do it that were easy to replicate. And it's also really good for teaching math and geometry.
And the other thing too, it's something that farmers can do. The rings and stuff, a lot of times your local extension office or your NRCS office would have that equipment.
Absolutely.
If you don't have it. And that way, because we only come once a year, and so, or one time. And so it's really kind of fun to see how it's changed. from
Yeah,
year to year just by the different management techniques that you can do. And it's something you can do yourself. And it's something that's
absolutely.
fun, it's fun, it's easy, and usually you can get somebody to help you. As you can see, those little kids would, enjoy it and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, so this is I think a kindergarten or first grade classroom, and they're doing another test. And this is just, we have a piece of wire. It's that sort of plastic coated wire that you can get at Home Depot or whatever. It's a particular length, and so you just form that into a circle, and then you count how many different species you see in there.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you're basically just, and it's a good exercise with kids, but it's also fun to do with your friends of like, so is this the same as this
Mhm.
one? You look at
Mhm.
the leaf, you check it out, and like, look, oh, was that just a young one or is that a different one?
Yep.
And then you can also put your hand on there, and there's like a test of like your hand spread wide versus your hand with the fingers closed versus the back of your fist versus your
Mm.
thumbprint. And you can calculate how much bare ground you have.
Mm.
And
Cool.
then you can also look at the soil surface and see, do you see worm castings? Do you see ant hills? Do you see any sign of spiders? Do you see how much biodiversity is there? And so if you go back to that same spot year after year and use your hoop, then you'll know, are your bare patches filling in? Are you getting more diversity of plants? This is particularly good for pasture
Mhm.
or lawns. Are you getting more signs of insect and other diverse life
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
participating, growing the land there? So,
Exactly.
but
That
again,
diversity, right?
really
That
fun to get
diversity.
your local
Mhm.
school, to get your grandchildren, et cetera, your children involved, and so that everybody's starting to understand, hey, when we have a place that has more diversity, the water soaks in faster here than it
Mhm.
does over here. And it soaks in faster here in the sand than it does on the pavement.
Mhm.
And then, let's see, I think I have a little video of this. Maybe go, let's see what's next. I think that was the end. Oh, we'll talk about that later if people want to.
Yeah.
Um,
And then Robert
well, here, I'll
Jones.
leave this one up because this
Yeah.
one, yeah, if you're interested in Substack, I publish lots of articles, lots of workshops with great teachers. I'm hoping to have John Lundgren has said he'll do one with me soon.
Nice.
That
Yeah.
one with Colin Seiss, with Anastasia, the biotic pump lady. So lots of things happening at both of those spots. But
So,
yes, was there another question?
yeah, one more question from Robert. He said, so I'm assuming pathogenic bacteria can also be precipitated as well.
The ones that go into the air are very particular kinds of bacteria. I think there is a diversity of them, but they don't all have that hygroscopic capacity.
Mhm.
So um, those are. It's a good question, but I
Mhm.
don't think that's true.
Mhm.
Uh, it doesn't mean that it's not a little bit true, but it's the rain making bacteria are bacteria that are adapted to do just that.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah,
Okay. Yeah. See if there's any more.
but it is
Yeah.
a good point about pathogenic bacteria being airborne. And
Mm.
that is one of the things that one of the benefits of having a soil sponge that does not fall apart with the wind
Mm.
is that you don't get those airborne, like what they found is there are a lot of antibiotic resistant bacteria that are in the air and in the wind around feedlots
Mm.
because things get dry and then a wind comes along and you end up with all of that in the air. And there are even natural pathogens in soil. If you've ever heard of, I think it's called soil pneumonia, um, that we don't want our soils to be blowing in the air. They're not meant to do that. They're meant to stay on the ground. So
Yeah. Yeah. To be held by plants, right? To be held by plants.
yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead. If there's any more questions that you have, go ahead and put them in the chat, or any thoughts or
Okay.
comments that you have, share with us.
We'll just keep going back and forth here. I've got some other slides. I
Okay.
was sort of holding back because I wasn't sure how many questions we'd have.
Yeah.
So remember we talked about all of the different things that influence water infiltration. But there are a few other things that we didn't get to, which is that it's not just about how much water does the soil hold, but also how quickly does the water reach the surface. So intercepting or interrupting the water falling, that the plant leaf structure, the density, the diversity, the complexity means that the water that's falling down will take longer to get there, which means there's more time for it to soak in. Because if it all comes at once and there's nothing to stop it, as water molecules find each other, they stick to each other, and then they move more quickly. They have more power. So think about, and this is same thing with horizontal water movement, that if you have more surface texture, more roughness, more plants and plant litter, those all serve as like billions of little micro dams that prevent the water droplets from finding each other, because it keeps stirring them up, swirling them around. And so it's just harder for that water to get the power to move quickly across the land. If you think about your windshield, little raindrops coming on your windshield or on your window, and they stick when it's just one or two, right? They just stick. So they do stick to things, and they will stick to the grass or to the leaves. So we see that little bubble like raindrops on the leaves. But then if a few find each other, then they start running down the window, right? So that's why we want to have a very diverse, complex thing, both horizontally and laterally, because that slows the water down and gives it more time to soak in. And
So
then
heights
for
of
all of
different,
you,
so different heights of plants and also different leaf shapes and sizes.
yes, yes.
Yeah.
So, and ideally, you really have a multi-story landscape. So you have trees and shrubs and bushes and then lower plants. Even if you're growing crops, that you find ways to have that at least in rows. You see in France, they used to have all those tall, skinny trees in between the crops. They really help to break up wind, which is also an evaporating force, that when wind comes along, it moves the water that has already evaporated out of the way, and it makes the air drier so that more water can evaporate. Because once you get to a certain level of humidity, the water can't evaporate anymore. So wind is drying as well. So having more vegetation, more trees, etc., will break up that wind and help keep the water on the land. And then during droughty periods or periods of low rainfall, having a lot more vegetation means that you get to do dew and fog harvesting. So the water that is in the air now can recondense onto surfaces, right? So it might be recondensing onto what we talked about up in the sky, but it can also recondense onto plant surfaces. And you'll see that if you have a lot of vegetation in the morning, you go out walking barefoot, you will often have your socks would be wet or your feet would be wet. When you have a lot of life in the soil, each time that one thing eats another, just like if I eat a pear, what's going to happen to the water that was in the pear? I'm going to pee some of it out. So if one microbe eats another underground, what the water that was in that cell is now available in the soil to the plants. It's not a lot of water, but it could be enough to help get through a few more days of drought. Same thing with the dew. Dew can be a pretty significant amount of water. It's not the same as rain, but it's not bad when you don't have water. The mycorrhizal fungi also can go and find water that is stuck to the inside of the soil pores. So if you think of like, if you drink a glass of water, the inside of the glass is still going to be wet at the end, right? There's little droplets stuck there. But if you took a paper towel, you could get a lot more water out of that glass. Not enough to keep your farm going for months, but maybe enough to keep those plants alive for another day or two. So the mycorrhizae are like that paper towel. They can go and find the water that's stuck to the inside of the soil pores and bring it back to the plant. And then rhizophagy, when you have also a very active soil food web or lots of biology going on in the soil and you're not killing it off, the plants themselves actually envelop the microbes and get the moisture and nutrients out of them, but don't kill them, and then spit them back out to go get some more. So the plants know how to get water directly from, it's almost like they're little pears and apples in the soil, right? Or little watermelons floating around that they can eat and then spit back out so they grow again. Okay, and then maybe kind of reviewing here that the soil sponge keeps those soil particles intact in water events. So it reduces erosion, reduces mudslides, captures and filters and reduces runoff, reduces those algal blooms. So we have cleaner streams and rivers and lakes and oceans. Soaks up and stores water to reduce flood, drought, fire risk, refilling all the water stores, and also by storing water underground for plant growth. When we have more photosynthesis happening, that's kickstarting the carbon cycle, right? It's taking the CO2 and turning it into life. When we have more transpiration happening, or that's plant sweating, then that's kickstarting the water cycle. So in those two, that water and carbon cycle together are creating the climate on Earth. So the soil sponge is kind of the starting point or the ground for a lot of that to happen. By keeping the soil particles intact in wind events, it improves air quality, not just for humans, but for all the life that breathes on the planet. And it also means that you have cleaner snow and slower melting of glaciers, because if you have a brown or black glacier top, because there's been a lot of airborne soil, as soon as the sun comes out, all that snow is going to melt and you're going to get flash flooding. Same thing if you don't have tree cover over the snow. The tree cover helps to shade the snow and prevent it from melting so fast. So then you get these flash floods in the spring and you don't get that long, slow seasonal stream flow into the valleys that is in places like Colorado is supposed to be where a lot of the water comes from. And then more open space underground. So that means it's easier for plant roots to grow and find water and to find the nutrients. It's easier for the fungi to explore and find and transport nutrients and water. The nutrient integrity of the plants improves, and that improves the health of all life, everything that eats plants. It provides insulation, so kind of like having a sweater or a quilt that's very fluffy. It regulates the ground temperature so it doesn't freeze as quickly, and it also doesn't heat up as much. And better habitat. So that is actually a whole other world under there. So there's air, which life needs, there's water, there's food, and a regulated climate underground. And you've probably seen this slide. This one's been going around for years, but that soil temperature affects the plants and soil biology and evaporation rates, and also the temperature of the air above the soil.
Awesome. Thank you, Didi. That was amazing. Yeah.
It's great to be with you.
It was awesome. Yeah. What a great way to weave in, all those different things, because the water cycle, the carbon cycle, all of those affect how that water infiltration is going to go. So yeah, and how important they are to mitigate a lot of the problems, that we're experiencing on our farms and in our communities. So yeah. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone who joined us.
Yeah, all these farmers who are here today or who are going to watch us in the future, you're the ones who are really doing this. I can talk about it, but you've got your boots on the ground. And I just want to thank you for your amazing work and for being willing to experiment and try things and learn new things wherever you're at in your journey.
Perfect. Perfect. That's a perfect ending. Thank you all.